All right, so up next, we're going to look at a vocabulary question. For vocabulary questions, when you have to choose the correct meaning of a word, it's helpful to read the following: the sentence that the word is in, the sentence right before, and the sentence right after. That's because the area of the passage that's surrounding that word is called the context. So, for example, discriminating, if we go back up and find it, the letters and words that are around it are called the context. So context clues are literally when you use the words, phrases, and sentences that surround the word that you don't know. So that's why it's important. Don't just read the paragraph that it's in. Don't just read the sentence that it's in. You need to read the sentence before and the sentences after. So let's read this one right now. The blind student could read by feeling the raised letters, but even though they were raised, discriminating between the letters was difficult and time consuming. Also, very few raised print books were available because they were difficult and slow to make. So we're looking for something that's going to fill in for discriminating. Let's look at our answer choices. Believing statements, remembering events, inventing processes, or judging differences. So what we're going to do, we're going to fill those answer choices in to that word, and we're not just going to read the sentence, we're going to read the context around it to make sure it makes sense in the context. So for the first one, believing statement, let's go back up and look. The blind student could then read by feeling the raised letters, but even though they were raised, believing statements between the letters was difficult and time-consuming. Also, very few raised print books were available because they were difficult and slow to make. So in this one, believing statements did not really make sense at all in what we were talking about, because what they're really talking about are these books and the relationship between like the raised print and the letters. So that doesn't make sense. Let's look at our next one, remembering events. The blind student could then read by feeling the raised letters, but even though they were raised, remembering events between the letters was difficult and time-consuming. Also, very few raised print books were available because they were difficult and slow to make. So that one does make sense because they're talking about remembering the events between the letters and then this raised part here. So that might be an answer choice that works. Let's check our other ones. Inventing processes. The blind student could then read by feeling the raised letters, but even though they were raised, inventing processes between the letters was difficult and time-consuming. Also, very few raised print books were available because they were difficult and slow to make. So they're not really talking about inventing anything right now because the letters were already pressed onto the paper and he wasn't inventing anything at this point. Really, they're just talking about the letters and then how it felt with the raised up part. So that one doesn't make sense either. Let's look at judging differences. The blind student could then read by feeling the raised letters, but even though they were raised, judging differences between the letters was difficult and time-consuming. Also, very few raised print books were available because they were difficult and slow to make. So this one wouldn't really make sense either because he's not judging the differences. What he's really doing is trying to figure out reading based on feeling the letters. Even though they were raised, he wasn't judging the differences between the letters at all. Really, what he was doing there was he was remembering what was going on between the letter and then that raised up part. So had I not read the sentence that was before it and the sentence that was after it, I may have plugged one in and it would have made sense. That's why you got to read the sentence before and you have to read the sentence after in order to make sure that it makes sense when you do it.